So yeah, welcome, Mariam. Thank you so much for joining us. Um,
It's a
it's a real
thrill. It's my first time doing an Instagram live as well, so I'm feeling like a kind of I thought I'll be super chill because it's like remote, should be chill, but it turns out yeah. So I'm kind of nervous for other reasons because it's my first time here. Turns out you can write a book about technology, and then be completely useless in another part of it.
I feel this whole thing is very fitting. Absolutely. It's made me feel very old. I realize that I don't know what all the icons on these apps mean anymore. But let's move past that. Um, so I'm going to introduce Mariam first. Mariam, you've been um, related to the games industry and talking about the games industry for really quite a long time at this point, haven't you?
Uh, yeah, I suppose since around, well, I did my master's thesis on video games and politics around 2016, and that was the stepping stone in talking about it publicly. Yeah, but I mean, I've gamed all my life, but I started talking about games publicly around then, yes.
Yeah, and you've had things like you've been in The Guardian and I think Vice and things like that. You had a podcast called Let It Up. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Is
yeah, it
that
was a
I was like, is it Let It
bite-sized
Up or Let
video
It Down?
cast that I'm very proud of. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, definitely. So check that out if you haven't seen that. And now you are described as an industry insider, which makes you sound like a bit of a plant.
I know.
Uh,
No, honestly, I had bless versa, but I had a bit of a fight over that one. I just sort of thought like it really kind of put the marks on it. It puts a mark on me in a way, right? Like that means like
mhm,
I'm that forever, and I kind of see myself much more as a cultural critic, rather than I have been working in the games industry like proper, like actually at a game studio for the last 5 years. But yeah, I still see myself as a bit more of an outsider rather than an insider. But please still buy the book, I beg you. No, but I think I understand how it works,
mhm,
and
mhm.
sometimes with, yeah, definitely with more critical insight than the people on the insides of it.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the first thing that I wanted to talk about is that the book, which by the way is not only brilliant, but it's very attractive. It's got this like delightful kind of vaporwave style to it, which sort of matches my pink face very well. So,
Do you want to
um,
hear the story behind the cover as well? Sorry, I'm completely
please, no,
irrelevant
no,
to
go
that
ahead.
here,
No, no, go
but
ahead.
just feel like a nice conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that was another also. It's like, well, okay, so I definitely wanted the sunset sunrise motif because if
Hmm.
you've read the book, you're sort of like the point of it is that you're not quite well. My yes, my mission to the reader or to the player is whether after the final boss level they feel they feel like defeated and like they actually see a sunset, or
Hmm.
do they feel like they've actually, or do they feel hopeful about the industry and then they see a sunrise? So that was what I requested for. Now, for my liking, ever so slightly, it's a bit too sweet looking. Like I would have made it a slightly nefarious color palette.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think Versa has a lot of kind of depressing covers as is, and I sort of think like I'm somewhat like Trojan horsing the politics in, like, oh, yeah, it's a sweet little book, and then I'm like Marxism.
Surprise! Cultural analysis. Gotcha. Yeah, I think the first thing I kind of really wanted to tell everyone who's watching is that this book is really it's not really like anything that I've read before. So when I first kind of went into it, I was like, okay, this is going to detail quite a lot of the tropes that we've already seen before. Like it's going to talk about analysis of narrative and maybe themes and things like that. And then all of a sudden, I realized, hang on a second, this is very different. And I think the first thing that you realize is the book is structured like a game, right? So for everyone at home, the book doesn't have chapters; it has levels. Of course, it does. Why wouldn't it have levels? Um, and I think that the idea is that you want the player or the reader, I should say, or the player reader to progress through these levels, and it is a kind of a linear path that you have, and you can't really understand level two until you've kind of completed level one, and so on and so forth. I just thought that was a really great way to tackle this problem, and I think that the levels they kind of get more difficult to quote unquote defeat because the problems that we're talking about in each level become seemingly harder and harder to surmount, right?
That was so the of hope that I was hoping to achieve. Yeah, that level of kind of complexity, as well as you say, the hopelessness, or just generally, you just feel more and more wounded. I think as the levels go, as the hope decreases in some ways. Honestly, when the structure came into mind, that's when everything clicked. And I honestly, I feel like the book wrote itself after I was like had that eureka moment that that's how it should be structured. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I think the other thing as well is that it kind of it threads the needle in this really impressive way. Is that I think if you've never really picked up a game before or a controller or anything like that, it doesn't immediately blind you with all the kind of industry jargon and specific sort of techno language of the games. Like there's pretty detailed footnotes about things like what an MMO is and what a AAA studio is. But at no point did I feel like as a seasoned pro gamer, I don't know whether you noticed, I've got some Funko Pops on my shelf, so I must be a pro gamer. If you could see my computer, it's obviously all neon, and there's like some waifu dolls on the table as well. They're on.
Do you have monster drinks next to you, like 5 of them?
I have Monster drinks, like I have energy chocolate. Yeah, I'm sponsored by Razer. But at no point did I feel like, oh, this is kind of talking down to me, or that this stuff is obvious. I think you've managed to do something really impressive. Is that you've managed to make things that are quite familiar to me feel new. But I think that people who are also completely new to this discipline won't feel like they've just been thrown in the deep end. I think that's a real achievement. So I just wanted to say congratulations for that.
Ah,
Um,
that's very kind. That really, yeah. I don't know. It's been a week since the book is out there, and I guess bit by bit the feedback is coming in. But I am still, yeah. I'm sort of like now. I don't know. It's sort of the anxious bit of whether I've been like understood. And so words like that really, yeah, in the world, that I feel like, yeah, something that I was attempting to do is hitting it precisely because of what you said. And this is why I've sort of got annoyed about the cover a bit more than maybe I should have. Like, I think the games industry, or writing about the games industry, tends to fall into one of or two camps. It's either the parents, that kind of are worried about their people, about their kids playing, or generally, or these, I don't know, just like, yeah, people who just see I don't know, fascism and
mhm,
or violence in games and sexism, and
mhm,
and so it becomes or also can be just these defensive gamers, who also kind of attempt to just say everything is fine here, everything is fine here, and also all the progressives or the liberals within the games industry attempt to just actually completely, I don't know, I'd say sugarcoat a
mhm,
lot of the industry's problems,
mhm,
so it's either defensive or like attacking without understanding it, or is kind of creating a lot of careers, and is attempting to say, yeah, exactly. If only we have, a few more progressive games, then everything is fine. And
mhm,
I worry about that. And so it is my attempt to be extremely passionate about the subject, but still saying that it is like, I worry about it deeply. And I think until something's changed, like, I think, I worry that it's actually going to burn us, if anything. But maybe we'll go into some of the specifics as well, I'm sure,
Yeah,
in the
no,
next
yeah,
little bit.
absolutely. Let's not spoil the surprise. So I think it will probably be quite helpful to explain to everyone who's watching kind of what the actual levels are. So give you what I'm going to do today is I think we'll all go through the levels together. We'll all try and sort of beat the game, as it were. And it's okay because we've got the author, so we've got the cheat codes. Um, and it
This is
starts.
great.
Um,
You're great. You're like pun ready. This is fabulous. Yeah.
It starts with introduction, which kind of I think is called main menu, and I think that's sort of where you set out the kind of well, what you've really said there, the manifesto for the book, really. And I think that the book is partly, it's partly a polemic, isn't it? I think it's partly this kind of rallying call to action. I've got a quote here. My ambition here is nothing less than to recruit an army of game changers for this vast and influential field, which shapes so much of what is around us, and yet my intentions are infused with purposeful contradictions. And I think that's what you were kind of referring to there, in that, this is something that people who think quite deeply about the hobby, we love it, but we also know that there's a lot of problems. And those problems don't just end with, oh, sometimes the breasts of the female characters are quite large, or, we seem to be shooting an awful lot of brown people in these games. I think these problems go deeper. And I think that's the sort of purpose of the levels, right? Is that, you start with history, which we'll talk about very briefly, in a minute. And then level one its themes, and there's the big bad themes of violence and misogyny and colonialism. They're all there. And I think that a lot of books that I've read before sort of end there and go, well, we've done our sort of our kind of literary critical analysis. We've seen this,
Drives me
and that's
nuts.
it. It's done. It's finished, isn't it? It's finished. We fixed it. And as you rightly point out, this is really only the start of the story. And by the end of level one, you realize that this is going to be a much harder struggle. Level two deals with communities, both the toxic and the positive ones around these games. And it reminds us that gaming is a participatory activity, is an interactive activity. It's not purely passive, which I think is really important. Level three is efficacy, and this is where it starts to get really kind of, gosh, okay, we do have something on our hands here. And this is about kind of what, if anything, is the revolutionary or potential for change within the medium. And you make some comparisons to the contemporary art industry, which I think are quite helpful. And then level four is the modes of production. And I think that as you read, that we're building towards this kind of Marxist reckoning where it's like, hang on a minute, we can smash all these different illusions, but if we can't kind of get to the materialist root of this problem, like these things are products that exist in a marketplace, and as such, the laws of the marketplace and commodity fetishism apply to them as well. And we're all complicit in that. P.S. And I confess, sort of, as I got to the end of chapter 3, I was like, I don't think I'm ready for chapter 4. And I was like, I'm struggling through chapter 4, sort of like on, my health bar was low at this point. And then the conclusion is final boss, which is kind of a summation of what we've got so far, and then sort of a suggestion of where we go from there. So the introduction, the main menu, it starts out, and I think it's great. It starts out by situating like your video gaming history and your relationship with games. And I think one of the things that was really interesting, and I think is really quite common, is that you codify that relationship with games by relationships with other people. So you mentioned family members and other relationships you had in your life. So I wonder if you could kind of just talk us through a little bit, like your changing relationship with games, like from when you were smaller to now.
Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose my introduction to games is relatively privileged in a sense that I was surrounded by people, safe people. So my father and my brother. Now, they were not great father and brother, sadly, but that was the one moment where we shared each other's kind of company was through gaming, and really I was only able to have a close relationship with them through gaming. But anyways, there were still these, I guess, still people that wanted fundamentally, good for me. And I do think it's a privilege, because to many, sadly, increasingly gaming is something they encounter, within communities that can be much less clean, let's say, so we all hear about awful stories of radicalization and a lot of quite sour communities empowering individuals do quite nasty stuff, from just innocent communities online. So, yeah, I mean, the very typical story. It's in the 90s, it's Eastern Europe, there's nothing to do. We're all like economically and generally depressed, but around the corner there was this internet cafe with like broken PS2s, that I was able to hang out in, as well as we were able to just pirate some copies of games, and so I had the privilege that I had a PC at my home, which was again not quite something that kids in the 90s in Lithuania had them. So I was very, again, privileged in the sense that my father instilled critical thinking into games very early on, So if I was playing Desert Storm, he was talking to me about like American imperialism, or if I was maybe getting addicted to The Sims, which I was, he was kind of explaining to me how some design choices of that game kept me wanting to go for more, like old Civ games, like One More Turn and so on, that actually is the designer who is playing with me, frankly, than anything else. So yeah, and that's kind of an advice that I also give to other people who like, that perhaps have people with addiction issues around this stuff, to sort of to take the lid off, to kind of to uncover what's underneath. Yes, it was very much kind of an escapist, relatively wonderful story. until things changed, and where I went into the closet with my gaming habits, and really only came out maybe age 26, was when I moved to the UK, age
Hmm.
17. Typical economic migrants, had no money, worked in a factory. Well, my mom worked in a factory in Liverpool and so on, and I found myself in lefty communities in London, in the squatting community and the anarchist community, and I love them to bits. But something about the British left, I think there is like a, how would I call it? Like there's an element of self-flagellation and or
Hmm.
aestheticization of what the left
Hmm.
has to be, and I feel like the left has to sort of, for the most part, torture itself, like and do activities that should be kind of uh wholesome and crafty and work, so I don't
Yeah.
know, that's gardening, that's maybe, I don't know, crafting and cycling, and maybe, I don't know, some dry stone wall building and so on. So when I tried to come in there, I was like, oh, but I like gaming, like I just was so not understood. Like we weren't really even allowed to have like consoles in our squats and so on. So there was this aesthetic judgment that I felt for being a gamer. So
Hmm.
really, I withdrew. I was like secretly gaming on my computer a little bit, but always felt judgment. And then it was 2016, and so that would have been just that. It was like an art school kid. That really could have been that. And it was 2016 that I just read a headline that said, in 2017, video games are going to overtake music and film industries combined,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's when like I just had no idea the impact of gaming. I just didn't understand at all the magnitude of this industry. And as somebody in the art school, and thinking how culture can change the world, I was like, okay, hang on a second. So this is the biggest cultural outlet there is, and we're just like not looking at it. Like nobody is looking at it from the left perspective. What's going on? So that's when I sort of knew I had to be involved. So yeah, it was very much a roller coaster of my relationship with gaming. So now, and then it was funny, like when I proudly announced that I am a gamer through like my work, finally to the left, like
Uh,
a few people like came out of the closet to me saying like, they're actually gamers as well, or they game curious and similar
yeah.
things. So yeah.
Game curious. I like that. Yeah. No, I mean just to kind of give some figures at the start of the book, you talk about like the sort of like the colossal slice of the market that gaming like has. 249 billion dollars last year. And just to put that into context, like music is 28 billion dollars and film is like 100 billion dollars. So, it's double film and with change as well. There's a great stat like near the start of the book. Well, it's not great; it's terrifying. That the cumulative playtime for Minecraft in China alone is 70 million years altogether. And again, to put that into perspective, everybody who watched Squid Game all around the world, that's about 190,000 years. Sorry, 190, yeah, 190,000 years. And The Shape of You by Ed Sheeran has been streamed for approximately 24,000 years, which, you know, I think that's a real view of what hell could be like, isn't it? Is that just for 24,000 years, Shape of You is streaming, and there's
I
like, yeah,
had
Squid
long
Game is
arguments
on in
with
the
them. So,
background.
oh my God, I actually had it like God forbid in brackets, and they deleted it, and I was so fuming at them that they deleted it.
Those cowards. Yeah. So I think that, you set the scene and is like this is something that we've really got to be taking seriously. That if we are serious about kind of reforming society and about reforming like market labor practices like within the entertainment industry as a whole, why on earth wouldn't you be looking at the biggest one? That's insane, right? Um, and I completely agree with you. This sort of like almost sort of monastic attitude that the left often has is that there's no time for joy. It's got to be miserable, and that there is a hierarchy of pastimes. And I think you're right. Is gaming is still really really quite low to the bottom.
Yeah, it also
Something that I
infuriated in terms of how it's portrayed. Like Taylor Swift's tour gained like $1 billion, which is like amazing, good on her and so on.
Mhm.
But it's all over the news. It's like it's on all the headlines. Your
Yeah,
$1 billion tour is like what everybody's thinking about.
yeah,
Grand Theft Auto 5, $8.5 billion,
yeah.
dollars, and that's one game. That's one game, and that's not a massive worldwide tour, and yeah, it's just the fact that this is just not showing up
Hmm.
anywhere in the popular media is mind blowing, and it's gonna cook us alive. Is what's gonna do.
Well, quite literally, we'll get to how it's going to cook us alive a little bit later. That'll be a fun thing to think about. So the history, like I say, is this kind of this tutorial level that you sort of have, which is great. Which are kind of, I think, it's brief, but it's a remarkably comprehensive account of like all the kind of flashpoints in gaming history that sort of get us to this point right now. And as I was making my way through the milestones, and these are all things that I was familiar with, like the
Yeah.
history of Atari and the crash and all this. I was like, I know all these things, sort of like like sort of in the abstract, but when you put them all together in a kind of a coherent story, you realize that gaming is this perfect case study for the absurdity and the insidiousness of capitalism as a force that just takes something, completely guts it, leaves it to die by the side of the road, and when it's rallied again, does it again. Um, and alongside that, there's this kind of surreal absurdism that's sort of injected into it as well. It's like, for those of you that don't know, like in the early 80s, there's this massive crash where the all the money that's been invested into video games, this huge amount of money, just it simply bottoms out. It's unsustainable for a little while. Um, and so you have this gaming company, Atari, like burying like thousands of cartridges in the New Mexico desert. And you really go, that can't be real, and it is real. They were mostly E.T. the extraterrestrial game, which is poor E.T. What did you do to deserve that? Um, and you've got things like as the the misogynist streak and the exclusionary streak that seems kind of baked into gaming from the start. You realize that there's a lot of external forces that are making that happen. So you talk a little bit about
Precisely.
the
There's nothing
IB.
natural about
Yeah,
where we ended up, and I think
yeah,
that's very, very important to underline that these were particular strategic decisions, and also, like, again, the left completely like looking away, and so the labor practices got gutted, marketing was making particular decisions, certain demographics were pushed out and really pushed out. It's not like they weren't there. So yeah, I suppose yeah, I wouldn't want the point is to describe precisely the fact that there was nothing set about this. It's just
mm,
particular historical choices that made us, yeah, that brought us to where we are. And it's ours
yeah.
for changing, as well.
Oh, definitely. I think that that's the thing, is that it shows that there's nothing natural about this. There's nothing inherent about this. Like, so you've got this kind of this IBM programmer proficiency test where it's sort of like is skewed like massively in favor of a particular type of man that kind of gives us the traditional kind of gamer stereotype that we have today as like introverted, socially awkward, sort of like misanthropic. And as you point out, this self perception of a lot of like disaffected young male gamers. It's been manufactured by a company in the 70s and the 80s for a very particular reason. And it's not only harming women, it's like all patriarchal things, it's harming men as well. You've got and it's not just even that this is an attitude that was sort of like knocking around in the 70s and the 80s. You've got an example of a Google memo from like 2016 where a Google employee feels completely within his rights to say that he feels that the female employees couldn't possibly be good programmers because they're more neurotic, and that's like some mad Freudian language. Um,
Also, sounding very neurotic as well while he does,
yeah, absolutely. I'm really concerned about all these neurotic people. Yeah, definitely. And then I mean, as the story kind of continues, bigger players get involved. You start to see state actors getting involved, like with games like America's Army. And this is kind of this is where Doom ushers in the sort of the normalization of kind of violence in video games, and we can talk a little bit about Doom in a minute. And I feel like the price of 3D immersion, it was almost sort of a fait accompli that it had to be violent. If you want 3D, it's got to be violent. Sorry, that's how
yeah.
it is.
Something
Um,
as intimate as an encounter had to be
mhm,
pushed to that natural conclusion,
mhm.
right? It could have been anything else. Like, I don't know, like we walk around the world and we encounter each other all the time, and I think uh, unless sadly you're in a very particular region, like you won't be like just shooting at each other, right? So there's this diversity of what a contact can be, but sadly, yeah, because of, I guess, innovations of Doom, one particular one was chosen. Now listen, I'm no innocent here. The third-person shooters are probably my favorite games, and I think, yeah. So I understand the cleaning of the screen kind of the need for it and so on.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
precisely one particular mechanic, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different gaming mechanics, just was drilled in for very particular reasons, not necessarily because that was the good one, and
Yeah.
it's great to see now that becoming diversified or whatever. But yeah, but just for due to relative accidents, yeah,
Hmm.
we ended up where we are.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other examples, we'll move on in a minute, but I think it was an Atari advert from the 70s or something, for this game called, it's not called Space Invaders, but it's something like, it's like Space Commanders. It's this very abstract kind of
Space
geometric
Odyssey,
shape,
possibly.
possibly Space Odyssey. And the advert is like this, like almost naked woman, like standing next to this arcade cabinet. It's like, she has nothing to do with this.
Love it.
What?
Gotta
You
love it.
know?
Yeah.
It's like in The Simpsons when it's like, do you come with the car sort of thing? Like it's just wild. So I think the history chapter does a really great job of sort of explaining that this isn't necessarily a predetermined situation, but like anything that finds itself in the sort of the nexus of capitalism and neoliberalism and imperialism ideologies, it gets jammed and it gets sort of like violated into this really unpleasant shape. Um, and that kind of brings us to level one, which is themes. And I think
I
the
really
main
wanted to get
takeaway,
that one out of the way early, and I'm so
yeah,
glad that you kind of caught that as well.
yeah. And I think, you make it really clear from the start. It's like, yeah, you know what? There's violence, there's misogyny, there's colonialism. These feel to be like the talking points that like sort of take all the oxygen out of the debate,
Okay, when
right?
somebody hears, oh yeah, I work in the intersection of video game and politics, straight away, like 9 out of 10 times, it's gonna be like, oh yeah, I guess there's a lot of violence in video games, or oh yeah, I guess the games are quite sexist, and it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's true, but it's devastating to me that particular message is where we are in regards to sophistication of video games and politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really attempting to get that out of the way early. Yeah.
And I think that, you kind of set out your stall fairly early here in that, um, each one of those points you sort of address and you say, yeah, there are plenty of examples, and here's the most egregious ones, like, the most racist ones, the most sexist ones, etc., etc. And then you pull out examples to the contrary. So, for example, um, you talk about games that don't require any form of conflict at all, or you point to I think there's a great bit about Hotline Miami, where somebody kind of reflects on the kind of the nihilism of the violence that's been put in front of them, and it makes them think about the kind of the act of simulated violence in a way that they haven't thought about before.
No,
In
precisely. I
in
think that has been one of the themes actually that's come out from the players who have read the book. Was they've been saying, thank you that you don't completely give away something as complicated as violence to the
Mhm.
right completely, because I think again there's this temptation to say violence is the right wing, and anything that is not that is the left wing. And I think as the left, again, if we want to even get anywhere, we shouldn't be fearful of violence. We should be thinking, we should be more interrogating perhaps how it's used or by whom it's used. But I am absolutely not willing to say that there is anything quite progressive about non-violent games, or that all violent games are automatically reactionary. I do not
Mhm.
believe that. I think there can be incredible amounts of poetry in violence, and I think, as we all know from good fine art, that witnessing violence and particularly well curated experiences can be absolutely life changing. So yeah, I didn't want to also give in to this pressure of saying violence in video games 100% bad. That's just not necessarily the case. Similarly with feminism, I didn't want to make it sound like just having more women in games is solving anything, and or is some sort of particular sign of feminism.
Mhm.
It really depends what kind of woman, what is their intention. I also, I want to again complicate it, because I think it is very, very tempting, and I think a lot of where the liberal left has gone is in the sort of like in the game of representation, but not necessarily looking for what end, or what's the next step necessarily. It is a materialist critique of the video games industry after
Yeah,
all.
yeah, definitely, and that's it. So I just on the misogyny thing. There's a great line here about Lara Croft. I mean, like, everybody's favorite incredibly privileged aristocrat who just steals stuff, right? Um, Lara Croft and other characters you say they often have these kind of like daddy issues, these sort of like absent fathers, which I think sort of is immediately this like real red flag because it allows the male player to act as this sort of surrogate kind of father figure or slash lover kind of thing, which is deeply problematic. And you say, quote, she ferries herself around the world asking for help from poor indigenous people who almost certainly meet their death. And you mentioned as well that every archaeological site that stood for thousands of years mysteriously ends up like in pieces after she's gone. And I think, she's a great cipher, isn't she, for sort of like a very particular like white Western imperialism. Um, and it's and it's not just Laura Croft, is it? You talk about kind of like there's a real kind of girl boss feminism in a lot of these. It's cool because like our military shooter now has a woman in it, and she shoots the indigenous population just as effectively as the guys do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
it's,
I'm not particularly beloved by the games industry with my takes on this, and I also bring it up to the management as well. There's a lot of gold boss feminism within the games industry, like
mhm.
I mean, for a good reason. Certainly, we as women are underrepresented, and I hopefully things are changing. But I do worry, and I mean, we'll get to that. I think in the modes of production chapter
Mhm.
where somehow, a woman in games who is a game developer is well, yeah, is seen as a woman in games, but anybody who is perhaps shedding blood, sweat, and tears for us to even have our careers whilst putting together the hardware on which we work under absolutely excruciating conditions is not seen as a woman in games, and it troubles me deeply, and it just really again reveals the kind of careerism that takes place in a lot of these spaces.
Yeah, women in games are fine if they're in the boardroom, right?
Mm.
With a big power shoulders on their suit. Yeah. And again, like you talk about, I mean, I pulled out Night of the Woods, sorry, Night in the Woods, I should say, and Immortality, and I'd also probably add some like maybe like Beyond Good and Evil, Jade from Beyond Good and Evil, as
Yeah,
like
these are good
characters
ones.
who,
Just to underline, these are good guys in my
yeah,
book.
they're great, they're really great, and so. The point I'm trying to make here is that you sort of you show us the bad ones, you then talk about some potential good representation, but you don't let us off the hook because after all, this is just level one, right? And you made this great point that representation alone and sort of more progressive uh, actors of color or female or LGBTQ actors or whatever within the game space doesn't fix it. All it does really is kind of make us feel a little bit better about ourselves for a little while. And you pull out the example of Lucas Pope, and I think Lucas Pope gets raked over the coals here a little bit. But I think Papers, Please, again for the stream, Papers, Please is a an indie title in which you play a border guard at a sort of a fictional Central or Eastern European country, and the mechanic is: do you let people through the border or do you not? And you have to check their papers and make sure that they are correct. And you can also take bribes, and
We
that's
also
kind
have
of the core.
to underline crucially, when this came out in 2013, it was marketed and received and all the profit and the awards as the political game.
Right,
Like this was like this is the first left-wing political game, and
totally.
it was marketed as that. So that's also kind of what I'm worried
I know,
about.
I'm Mariam, I will hold my hands up. I always used to be, you've kind of got this like stock of sort of like quote unquote like woke games that you can be like, no, the games are great. Honestly, they're great. It's always one that I would always trot out and be like, and there's Papers, Please. And it really makes you think. It's really good stuff. And it was only when I kind of read your critique of Lucas Pope's, or perhaps the marketing engine around Lucas Pope's game that I was like, yeah, actually, it kind of rings a little hollow, doesn't it? It kind of rings a little bit hollow. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that before we move on,
Oh,
but
I feel like I have a lot. Like, so that I think that was somewhat, yeah, I wrote a piece, I think I want to say in 2018, a radical critique of Papers,
mhm,
Please. And
mhm,
I didn't understand, yeah, I didn't think it will get as kind of viral at the time as it would, because again, I come from the fine art background, writing critiques and political critiques of pieces of art is
mhm,
just so obvious and normal and deepening the conversation, and just seems like yeah, an enriching of a medium,
mhm,
and
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but the reaction to that was so defensive. It's like, no, but we just have one guy, we have one game.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I mean, again, if anything, it exposed, like, I guess, the poverty of the medium, anyways. But yeah, I suppose, as you say, I think, and this is where, again, sometimes, there's that narrative versus ludology question that comes up sometimes. And I say, no, 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 none of these. Marketing is actually where it's at with a lot of these things. And so, yeah, the Lucas Pope very much benefited from a coverage of being seen as a progressive game maker, whereas, yeah, I suppose the efficacy of that game is certainly unclear. I have problems with the extent to which he kind of like takes on a theme, creates an entire, I suppose, universe around it, gets, all the millions and all the awards, and then drops it immediately. I haven't seen him create any kind of comms around any support for migrants, for migrants issues and so on. Not that like he has to, but I think there was just something terribly kind of cynical about just visiting a theme and kind of, yeah, abandoning it. But yeah, I write entire paragraphs with my issues with that particular project at its time, given the particular market,
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of brings us more or less to kind of the end of the theme level, and the player, hopefully, and the viewer will realize that sort of this kind of critique of theme is all well and good, and like it's a great place to start, but we've only really sort of dipped our toe in the water, so we move on to communities now.
And that's where things get interesting for me,
It
anyways.
really
Yeah.
is. It's when people start to get involved, isn't it? Really. So, I know that you would like to read like a small selection from communities, so that's awesome. I also wanted to just say to everybody who's on the stream right now, if you would like, if we've got time at the end, we're going to do like some questions. So I don't know if you want to type some questions in the chat, or I think there is a little questions function on Instagram Live if you want to do that. If we've got time at the end, we'll try and answer some of those. But anyway, Marijam, over to you. Please have a little read from level 2.
Excellent. Thank you. This might be 5 or 6 minutes or so. The year was 2015, and I was in my safe cocoon of an anarchist lifestyle, political struggle day and night, more tranquil, private moments of partying and gaming in between. I fell in love with an English lad who was moving to London at the time. Like me, he also found temporary housing security through squatting. I was a political person with a niche interest in gaming. He was a fighting games influencer and YouTuber known online as Theory Fighter with the lefty heart. We started exchanging thoughts, ideas, and life experiences, as two people do when they've just fallen in love, and an entire world opened up to me. It was Theory Fighter who first told me about the Goon Swarm versus Band of Brothers struggle in EVE Online. That's a game that came out in 2003, but is still very much around. Probably with some Polish beer in hand during a cozy bohemian street drinking session in Hackney Marshes. So, we're walking around like Hackney, with some tinnies in hand and just talking games and politics. And as clearly as I can identify, this was the moment that broadened my conception of what gaming spaces are capable of, and opened my eyes to the possibility that all of us are living in a reflection of the customs of these spaces. So yeah, I was just sort of art school airhead, an anarchist and an activist in the squatting community, and kind of gamed secretly, but it was through meeting Theory Fighter that like the light bulb moment came, and I'll tell you why now. To those who have not spent years in it, EVE Online appears like a glorified spreadsheet. Playing the space-themed, massively multiplayer online role-playing game, MMORPG, involves a lot of counting and ordering while dispensing a finite amount of resources among the characters within the game. So you essentially have a bunch of spaceships within the space, and you kind of control them, and you pimp them, and then there's entire battles within this massive space. Set more than 21,000 years from now, when Earth's resources have exhausted, EVE Online imagines humanity seeking to colonize the rest of the Milky Way. Players control a fleet of ships, the size and power of which depend on the skill and social and material capital of each player. Precisely. So some people were able to actually, buy via microtransactions and so on, like the ability to buff up their chips. However, by the late 2000s, this monetary inequality became glaring. While some players were investing tens of thousands of hours to upgrade their fleets, others took a shortcut by acquiring in-game enhancements with real-life money. The so-called Band of Brothers was a small group of spaceships that used the latter tactic. outsourcing or straight up buying power over the virtual environment, and soon dominated the galaxy of EVE Online. A group of poorer but more skilled players grew fed up with this dynamic and began scheming and coordinating on ways to reverse this trend, which they believed had wrecked the game. And these are tens of thousands of people, I must note and underline. So in 2006, thousands of these players formed the group Goonswarm and commenced an epic battle against the Band of Brothers. It took an incredible amount of gameplay, weeks, unity, and coordination, but eventually Goonswarm secured the victory in this modern David and Goliath story. The destruction of the Band of Brothers virtual fleet cost its players around 6,000 actual real-life dollars. The key to Goonswarm's success was their number, their anonymity, and their inventive communication techniques. Their members infiltrated the private forums of the Band of Brothers, leaking information to their teammates and sabotaging any counterattacks. Their large numbers and dedication to the mission allowed them to gain the upper hand over their affluent adversaries. The turning point came when the chairman of the Band of Brothers, Hargot Agomar, defected to Goonswarm because he, by his own account, preferred the group's more horizontal organizational structure. So crucially, the tens of thousands who didn't have money were organizing themselves horizontally, and the couple of them who had the money were extremely vertical. So to add to the beauty of this marvelous act of resistance, it thoroughly undermined the business plan of the game's developer, CCP Games. The company had introduced microtransactions to boost profits, a move seriously challenged by this legendary fight. Such activities by gaming communities exhibit the potential for game spaces to be sites of political expression. Unlike the narrative imposed from above by the game maker, the actions of communities are self-defined and self-motivated and reflect the active will of hundreds, sometimes thousands of players. This expression adopts many forms: explicit political organizing in games, consumer organizing, cooperative disruptions, and online meetings where players enact various functions in real life. This constitutes, perhaps surprisingly, an activation of otherwise passive individuals into political subjects. A couple more paragraphs. While some players assign political meaning to gamer communities, many do not. In fact, many participants in the Goonswarm versus Band of Brother fight might shrug or even shudder to hear their struggle described in a book like this as reflecting leftist tendencies. Gamers do gamer stuff, they will retort, and it's nobody else's business. Nonetheless, many of them engage in activities that are altruistic, such as coordinating and agitating. They canvas, form, and self-select into distinctive factions. MMORPGs provide a platform that is abstract and relatively light on narrative, which can become a rich space for self-expression, civic or otherwise. There, consciously or unconsciously, players compose slogans and languages that mimic existing power structures and the struggles between them. In the age of fears of declining civic participation and a widening gap between governmental bodies and the people they are meant to represent, it is fascinating to observe populations building communal structures and experimenting with various forms of management and administration, and all this voluntarily. Some of us recognize our role as consumers in video games and learn to affect change as active entities in this role. Having achieved our goal or enjoyed trying, we move on to attempting to affect real-life politics. Some succeed. In other instances, the results are devastating. From in-game experimentations with various models and self-organization to political actions and straight-up radicalization, the intensity and techniques represent an assortment of things. While players like me simply admire clever storytelling and engage in relatively basic sportsmanship, other players were creating entire civic systems in-game. Sure, some of it may arose from a spirit of competition, but as I started digging into the worlds of gaming communities, it became clear that much of it lay somewhere between power grabbing and seeking a sense of belonging. And if those are not politics, I don't know what is.
Brilliant. Yeah, so the chapter then kind of goes on to detail the various different manifestations of kind of what we might call like political action within or kind of a cooperative action, grassroots sort of activism within games.
The good,
so
bad,
you've
and
got,
the ugly as well.
well, right, and this is it. And I think again, like, you know, probably a lesser book would have like sort of skirted around the fact that this, you know, the online gaming communities are, you know, fertile breeding grounds for the alt-right and for you know, manifesting in things like, you know, Gamergate. But I think you kind of show it warts and all, because I think you know, you need to, because we need to be honest about the state of this community, this landscape, but also that, you know, to take the title of the book, everything is to play for. Like, why on earth would we walk away from such a fertile and such a vast potential groundswell of support? You know,
Absolutely.
um, and I think that you've got the kind of you can almost sort of like draw a line between a lot of the activities that you discuss like in the book and sort of like what we would call like traditional political activism. So you've got review bombing, which I suppose we often would think of as like boycotting or voting with our feet, right? Where if a company does something that we perceive as not good, then we sort of like we badmouth them on the platforms, we give them very poor reviews, or we just don't buy the product. I should point out this is kind of like both sides of the coin, so you've got some really good stuff, like, so for example, people being very comfortable about Hogwarts Legacy and the transphobic nonsense that the creator of the Harry Potter universe puts out. But then you've also got like the countless examples of reactionaries and right wingers boycotting games or review bombing games because they put like a rainbow flag on the side of a racetrack or something like that. You know,
Yeah,
um,
one game will have an entire gamut of politics, You'll go from Black Lives Matters activists to absolute fascist, So,
yeah.
and so there is just this entire political worlds that happen within them. Furthermore, as somebody who has now been on the left for more than half of my life, I see sort of like the kind of inability to organize with such kind of vigor often, and or good, like faith in good faith, or also allowing people to who are perhaps experts in their own field to deliver a particular message. So for me, it was also just like, how come how come this community of gamers at like Westward Journey are better
Mhm.
political organizers than a bunch of like activists with
Yeah.
whom I created massive, well, I attempted to create like entire mass movements, so there was just something as well as like, why are we not learning? And we're saying, young kids, or they're not political anymore, or these, or like perhaps they're not showing their politics the way that we would like them to. But that's our failure if we are
Mhm.
not, excavating and supporting these communities in all of their glory. Of course, as
Mhm.
you say, there's also a lot of danger and radicalization, and precisely, characters like Steve Bannon, like who
Yeah.
was like Donald Trump's right-hand man. He was in World of Warcraft way before, he even met Trump, like in early, in like sort of in the early 2010s, he was already talking to the World of Warcraft community and looking at kind of like a political vacuum over there. So I think it's a huge shame. And I think it's honestly, it's a huge failure
Mhm.
of the progressive left, the fact that we've abandoned these spaces and we're now paying the consequences. Like, gaming is, for all of its desires, is still more of a cousin of Silicon Valley than like the art industry. But so if we as progressives cannot even be in the crossover of like a culture and a technology kind of industry, what hope do we have in these entire tops of the towers of the bad bosses of the tech industry and so on?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, completely. I think that you mentioned a little bit earlier there that sort of that efficacy around organization and the sort of the quite egalitarian approach that so many communities have. I mean, it's great because I feel that so often you have these like tired talking points trotted out that like, oh, Marxism, communism could never work because man is an inherently competitive animal, and non-self-interested altruism is not within our character. And then you point to like sort of like the guild systems in, say, something like WoW, where it's completely against someone's self-interest to give away gear, but they do it anyway because they know that it will benefit the wider social network. um and this idea of each according to their ability, it's something that Marx talks about, right? And I think there is this tendency sometimes on the left that like if you're not on the front lines like throwing bricks, then you're not really a proper activist. Like that's no good. And I think that in a lot of gaming spaces, they've realized that there are lots of different ways to sort of contribute to a greater whole. It might not be, again, to use the RPG sort of the metaphor, you might not be a tank, you might be a healer, you might be a rogue or something like that, and that's okay because the group can't work if you've got five tanks, right? And I think that's
Absolutely. To
that's
kind
really
of bring
great.
it to an example that's a bit outside the book, but it's something that I've been kind of fascinated by in terms of this kind of hegemony type of questions.
Mhm.
I look at an example of something as hard and brutal as, oh, well, as IDF. The reason why it is so powerful and kind of all entangled in the society as well, is that it also kind of works in a gamified way, in a sense of individuals get to choose what they want to be within the IDF. So they get to be, if you want to be a radio broadcaster, we got you. You want to be a graphic designer, no problem. Want to be a fashion designer within the IDF? Yes, we need to uniform something, and so you get to be there's this like a Pokemonization of the military,
Yeah,
right?
you
So,
get to
and,
roll a
and then again,
character, right?
something, and
Yeah.
I agree that often within the left, unless you know how to sew a patch on your trousers, as well as you know how to make a Molotov, but as well as you know how to do a good how to run a meeting, and as well as if you know how to fix your own bike, then then you're not like a full activist,
Sure.
whereas the idea of an expertise in one particular area is something that we're not particularly good at. I now work for a games company. I have been for a while, and I am always very impressed in the production processes there. So sort of and utilizing all these tools like scrums and milestones and Asana and so on. And it just seems like, yes, you have a goal and you take small milestones to get there, and then you sort of reflect and try to reiterate as much as you can. And again, sadly, maybe I don't know, maybe for obviously because we're just sort of on the sidelines of a lot of the society generally, but there is this devastation in me how within the left we are unable to see big projects as something to strive for with sustainability, and to kind of grind it down like gamers do often, yeah, and to grind it perhaps again in the more sustainable manner. So yeah, so to me it's not just an aesthetic critique of or like a material critique of the games industry. It's also like attempting to learn from these fascinating spaces and to make our own organizing better, because my God, it needs to be.
Yeah. It comes back, doesn't it, again to that sort of like very prescriptive, like almost monasticism we talked about at the start. They're bad hobbies to have, they're bad approaches to have. Like, why on earth would we take, lessons from, say, agile project management? That's the world of the corporate. We don't do that,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to move on a little bit in a minute. But
Oh,
before we
sorry.
do,
Good chat with
no,
you all
no, no,
day.
no. Do you know what? I mean, we can keep going. But before we do, I think the last thing that I'd kind of wanted to sort of go in there is that your example with the IDF, and you mentioned Steve Bannon and the gold farming and things like that, is that it's remarkably frictionless. Or at least the right has made it remarkably frictionless to become a member of that club, right? It happens over a longer period of time. It's drip fed to young people who feel disaffected, or not necessarily young people, old people too. And I think that this is the trick in the communities that the left is missing, is that we're always saying it's hard to be a leftist. It's miserable. Good Lord, you're gonna sweat, you're gonna bleed, and again, it's we've lost that sort of that narrative of joy. I mean, by no means what I sort of call the current government like leftist by any stretch of the imagination, but they just seem to want to be preachers of doom and woe, and that turns people off. And if you've got a vacuum and somebody's offering you some easy answers, a sense of belonging and a sense of achievement, that's going to be incredibly attractive. Oh, and by the way, we've just packaged in a load of like not absolutely insane racist, misogynistic stuff as well. But don't worry too much about that. It's like the sort of the Jordan Peterson school of self improvement. It's like drink loads of water, tidy your room, women are chaos monsters, and check in with your friends. Sorry, what was number three again?
Very good. Very good. Nice.
Yeah.
It's also,
So
yeah, again, sometimes in my more grandiose days or whatever, with my tinfoil hat, I sometimes think, like, if only the left or like the cultural critics and so on, or I don't know, people in position of power, once you start thinking about gaming, like, I feel like it opens up everything, not only like political economy, cultural economy, also like formation, the technological modes of production. So like, it covers so much. I sometimes think it's like, don't they understand? It's literally like the most important thing.
in so many ways, it is kind of seen as this like macrocosm and this reflection of society. And like you say, like
Yeah,
quite
that
early
is
on,
for
this kind of
themselves. They have like 10 books on films and on art and 20 books on this and that, and this is their first on gaming. And last finally it's there. But I mean, it's to me, that's like the key to so many things. We need so many more of these.
that's it. And that kind of brings us nicely onto level three. Like games are this kind of like microcosm of society, and they are mirrors to society. And I think that is something that we need to come to terms with, is that they aren't necessarily. I think one scholar called the games are not empathy machines. Like, I don't play a game that has a progressive message, and all of a sudden I realize that the treatment of migrants is all wrong. I don't play Dream Daddy and then realize that actually my attitude to, like, gay parents has been wrong the whole time. So it brings us on to level three, which is efficacy. And I think this is the chapter that I really struggled with the most, because I think it was the one that I always sort of clung to, and I was like, well, if the game is just good enough, and if the mechanics and the narrative is just good enough, then maybe we can really change some minds. And I think you call that into question in a way, and you bring contemporary art in as a kind of a foil to that. So could you talk a little bit more about the thesis of chapter of level three?
Thank you so much. Yes. So it seems to me like even, yeah, that I kind of slightly, my narrative level, I suppose, implies that there's no way that a particular artist or game developer can necessarily, like I can actually necessarily change minds. That is not my intention. I do think that there can be. What I worry about, and this is the kind of and it is actually a huge hole in scholarship. I was speaking to quite a few like leading academics in some technology universities studying video games, and they do say that something like efficacy, or whether somebody's mind has been changed, is an absolutely understudied subject, and they are attempting to get some funding into that, but it's hard. I suppose my question is the context to this is that, again, even within so the video games industry is awful and mostly it's bad news, but every now and then, especially the journalistic class adores to sort of create some palate cleansers, so talk about, like, and also all these game awards, they love the aware games, or games for good, or games for, for peace, or somehow, progressive games. So there's this entire side of the video games industry where there is an immense amount of social capital in order by creating these self-marketing political games, and it kind of it has an outweighed significance, because the games industry needs to tell itself that they're still good guys, so there's a lot of economy in that, and again, if we are saying that this is the group of people that is attempting to change the industry, then I think we need to be checking whether they're doing that, or whether they're checking anybody's mind. And that kind of that again, that efficacy question is much less applied. And I feel like within the arts and the art industry, that is the key of it. Like often we see these political pieces of art, and the interrogation as to whether this really is doing anything other than relatively tokenistically attempting to touch the subjects, again, is much more sophisticated. Claire Bishop is a huge hero of mine. She wrote Artificial Hells, again with Verso Books. That is one of the main books on this. But there are entire libraries of looking into the efficacy within the fine arts, and there is nothing like that within games. Although it is it is a space that really kind of adores itself, and is adored by the industry, for them to tell themselves that they're good guys. So yeah, I mean, the whole of the book, I call it a bit of a candy shop, because it really is so put on examples, and then I sort of like flesh them out and in how they fit my points. But here I compare the type of political fine art, and I'm also basing it a lot on Maria Lind's excellent essay called This Is Going to Be Funny, a note on political art. And she makes this wonderful metaphor explaining how if you're going to tell, before telling a joke, you're going to say, this is going to be really funny. The joke is likely to be a bit less funny as a result. And I think the same thing happens within what she says. The same thing happens within political fine art, and I agree it's the same with games. Once you have marketed and presented to somebody, this is going to be a political, progressive video game, it is much less likely to actually have that effect. many political video games preach to the converted and yeah, create a kind of social capital feeding machine. I come up with a couple of criteria where I think political fine art has actually looked at the questions of efficacy much more seriously, and I then think about how games could do that. I also
Hmm.
think that something like institutional critique, for instance, games industry does much better than the art industry, because art
Hmm.
industry is political, sort of institutional critique gets folded into itself, whereas within games it actually will get you banned. And that is not to say that it is impossible to do good political the games. Like, there are a couple of examples where I think the authors succeeded to, but I suppose my overall thesis would be that if we are allowing for particular marketing of a particular genre, we should be looking at its efficacy as well. So, and also
Yeah.
this is the level where I bring in, cultural theory. We talk our Benjamins, we talk our Adornos, we talk our Pierre Bourdieu's, So this is again like where the complexity, I think, is upped a little bit as well, because we've left a lot of what we think of video games and politics are behind. Now we're looking slightly more into sort of the kind of global, more global problems or prospect in terms of actual change.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that you do say, and I think it kind of ties in with
Your writing
that
is
this is
so
going to be.
superior to mine. I didn't think it would get dark so quickly. So apologies, I'm a bit basically
No,
like
no,
in
I
the
think
dark.
it creates a brooding sense of atmosphere. Um, the kind of this is going to be really funny aspect. I think you bring up like the in certain conceptual and performance and participatory contemporary art, the ability to shock and to kind of upset expectations. And I think that's something that AAA games are never really going to be able to do because of the kind of marketing machines that happen behind them. I'm not going to pick up the God of War Ragnarok and I'm slicing up zombies and I'm riding around in the snow, and then all of a sudden it becomes this meditation on the human rights abuses of the Uyghur people. That's not going to happen, right? But I do think that the indie scene, and especially the indie horror scene, is really, really
You're
good
horsing.
at kind of
Yes,
like creating these
yes,
experiences
they are
where you'll be
stars.
you'll be playing something, and then all of a sudden, like you do it because it's a complete 180. And what's really impressive is that like the reporting around it and the community engagement around it, they're really keen to not wreck the surprise because they know they've felt that themselves and they felt the transformative power of that. So I think that that's something that we really need to tap into more. This kind of and it is ludological. It is kind of mechanics based in a way that a film or a book can't necessarily do, like a massive plot twist or a sort of a complete veer off in a different direction from a plot is one thing. But I'm thinking about a game like, say, I don't know, Doki Doki Literature Club, or a game like Inscription, where you think you're doing one thing and then you realize, oh my goodness, like I've been being played this entire time. Something else is happening. I've been complicit in something else, and now how do I get out of this? Like, can I get out of this? And I think that's great. And I think that I got to the end of level 3 and I felt utterly defeated, but I did sort of see that as a glimmer of like maybe we could kind of recapture some of that magic.
Yeah, and as you say, like that investment that you need in order to even boot up a game, notice it somewhere, download it, buy it, download it. It's just
Mhm.
such a higher investment for those efficacy questions, like for to have your mind moved or changed. But I mean, I don't. I think I do think that games can think of their modes of distribution in a much more creative way than they do.
Mhm.
Sadly, we are currently very much locked in a very narrow kind of way that the market manifests itself. Hence, level 4.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to. You kind of suggest some of the more unorthodox ways that games could be distributed to make them have a kind of a greater social efficacy. I don't want to spoil those because we want everyone to buy the book. So let's move on to level 4. Let's kind of like really get our grit on here. Again, just a reminder to everybody who is in the chat, if you would like to ask a question to Mariam, just type it in the chat or type in the question thing, and we'll try and answer it at the end. So level 4, modes of production. We've been kind of dancing around it the whole time. I think the modes of production have often like informed some of the other things that we've seen. It's the poison at the bottom of the well, isn't it? Um, And I mean,
The well. I don't know. It's like
it
the
is the
whole
well.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, very briefly for everyone, this is the brutal reality that the supply chains, the raw materials, the assembly lines that create the devices that power our gaming
That power
technology can all be
is
traced
like
back.
my career, and many of our
Yeah, right,
careers, of course.
right. Can all be traced back to these like kind of quite literal hell on earth scenarios in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, places that, by the way, have traditionally already been completely shafted by colonial projects and things like that. Um, so talking about kicking a guy while he's down, and not only is there a kind of a turning a blind eye to it, but there's almost like throwing the fuel on the fire from the industry as well, because we might just be able to eke a tiny little bit more profit out of it, you know?
Yes.
So this is what four is all about, and that goes. It's kind of starts with the production chains in the global south. It talks about the outsourcing of
No,
menial
I will correct you
tasks.
there. In
Okay.
fact, I end with all of that. What I wanted to make sure I do in the sense that I talk about the fact that politics and the kind of value chain, well, yeah, the value chains and the business side of it begins as soon as you've like opened the new file creation
Yeah.
on a new video game, let's say. So I
Yeah.
talk about game engines first,
Yeah.
right? Then I talk about publishers, and
Sorry.
and
Yeah.
we kind of into that. No, it's just because again, I think it's very important to say that relationship, a political, well, not just, but like there are items still, not that many, but there are still items in our lives that perhaps that haven't necessarily touched a marketized world yet, and with games that begins very very early on, and it
Yeah.
just of course snowballs into this destruction machine.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. The game as a kind of an entity, as a product, like on the market, is the alienation of labor, kind of like writ large, right? Like it just feels like every single bit of this
Yeah.
process is alienated and um is a result of capitalist nonsense, really. Um,
And
very
also, but
briefly,
what I really think is very, very important to underline is that these kind of conditions make shitter games. The fact that there's a monopolization of the video games industry and less actors, and yeah, these brutal conditions, and very much what's the word I know, like chasing the bottom of the barrel kind of
Mhm.
way of manufacturing. It results in, whereas games, it results in games that are unfinished, that are glitchy, that are like corrupted creatively,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so on. So it's what I worry sometimes a lot with a lot of these kind of my calls to action and so on, is that there might be this belief that I'm calling for a smaller pie or something. But I
Mhm.
think or yeah, or for somehow mm, just saying, yeah, that the games need to be in a particular way or less of them. And I think that's the kind of propaganda that I think the business community would probably rake us with, but or like would tell us, but that is just simply incorrect, because what we're seeing with the games industry is that the product. The result of the product is stratifying. The quality is dropping, and this is not a good time. I don't think times for gamers are necessarily going to be better. Like, I think there's this beautiful nostalgia to like PS2 games, seeing that there's actually used to be way more heart in games
Yeah.
from 20 years ago now
Yeah.
that there is now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I feel like what we've got at the moment. I think you talk about the kind of the marvelization of games, not just in the kind of like we create these sort of like kind of like franchises that have got to have a million different spin-offs. But I also was thinking like the marvelization of games, that there's only really the only IP that we're allowed now is remasters and
Absolutely.
remakes and this kind of
Yeah.
like chasing of nostalgia, because like, hey, doesn't it make you feel good? And maybe perhaps that's symptomatic of a wider problem with sort of late stage capitalism, that we need to be nostalgic for a time that never existed. Who could say? Who could possibly say? But again, it results in a crappier product. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to see. I just saw that Horizon Zero Dawn is getting a remaster. That game only came out like 5, 6 years ago. There's nothing wrong with it, you know. And yeah,
Yeah, my
you get this reaction,
feel
don't
for
you, from
better
the
life.
indie.
We'll see. Because I feel like I'm very badly lit, but maybe that's better. I don't know.
You're good. You're all good. You get like like you say, this sort of this reaction from the video game community of like, the PS1 aesthetics now that we've got, like
It's
games like
money, yeah.
Pro Country and stuff like that, that sort of look like there's sort of a half remembered version of a game that you saw in a video game magazine 20 years ago. It's awesome. I love it, you know. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah, and turns out that yeah, chasing for infinite fidelity is yeah, is just creating a spiral of destruction inside the game studios themselves as well as to the planet. You know, like yeah, we of
Mhm,
course we spoke about the awful conditions that bring about our hardware, but I think the society is relatively uninformed also about the horrific climate change impact that the games industry has from its production of hardware to also the electricity that it uses. And I find myself also like, and maybe I really should have put that in the book a bit more often. And I was just also just doing a festival in London, you know, talking about a lot of these things and listening to many different panels. Whenever the climate change is mentioned, you know, like there's like the drop in energy. It's like, oh yeah, well, climate change, you know, there's this guilt and so on. And we kind of, you know, we have to remember this hyper object, I suppose, that is kind of like makes us feel like a downer. And I feel much more like righteous and selfish about the whole thing. Yeah, sure, sea turtles, that'll be sad, you know, if they die and so on. But I feel very righteous in the sense of like, no, it's just the beaches that I used to go to 20 years ago, just like feel shitter, look shitter, and like are way less refreshing. You know, places that I
yeah.
used to just kind of enjoy, like, are just now like kind of relatively unbearable. So it's just surely we want flourishing, right? For the whole of the humanity, and just the seeing this just general like yeah, just degradation, you know, like, and I think I just want to be more ambitious for pleasure, you know. So to me, like
Mhm.
climate change is something that is gonna take away pleasure, and I really like pleasure. So I'm just so it's much more selfish than all this guilt stuff, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I was reading the bit about kind of the climate impact and even now, like our kind of our GPUs, like they're increasingly using like AI frame generation and stuff. And I'm gonna come out now. I have used upscaling on my NVIDIA card to make the game look a little bit nicer. And I just thought about it and I was like, every single, yeah, I know, right? Every single time that I made like a plant like have like more veins on its leaf, that's the equivalent of burning down a tree. And there's a real kind of cognitive dissonance. I don't know, it's
But that's the
insane.
same. It's like
So
I just got amazing stats, you know, that the amount of pictures that we store is the electricity is the same as running 5 million electrical cars for 20,000 hours each. The
mhm,
same amount, the same as with every pictures that we send to each other is the same. Also, five electricity amount is 5 million electric cars, 20,000 kilometers each. You know, so maybe I said miles, whichever. I mean, close enough. So it's we are fundamentally entangled in this, like a bodily so yeah. And, oh my god, something needs to change because I just want to, you know, game in peace.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, the book at no point is saying like, and therefore we should just stop making games. That is not the kind of takeaway that I want everyone on this call to think, is that you're talking about a kind of a radical rethink of the structures of the modes of distribution, the modes of production. And I mean, really, I think, as we've already alluded to elsewhere in this conversation, it is it it's really a call for a radical rethink of society, right? And I think that if we can mobilize some more interest in that cause through the lens of gaming, then brilliant, awesome, let's do it. Like let's mobilize that groundswell, and that kind of takes us to the final boss. And I think final boss is makes for some really difficult reading, and it's for all the reasons that we already talked about. But you do inject a sense of hope at the end, because there have been these massive wins, like in unionization, for example, which I know that you have had no small part, like in sort of like bringing about. So like awesome. And these are things that I remember even like sort of 5, 10 years ago, the discussions were rumbling. And, you had like bosses at like EA and Activision be like, never going to happen. And I mean, like, now who looks like the fucking dinosaur? Even something like talking about video game engines, the kind of debacle over the Unity engine. So, it always used to be, didn't it? There were the two big engines are Unreal and Unity. And Unreal is for your sort of like hyper realistic AAA, like, bombastic shooters. And then for your cool indies and your sort of like more quirky projects, you use Unity. And all of a sudden, Unity are like, hang on a second, we could be making loads more money. What if we just started charging on a per download, per install basis? We don't need to get into the kind of specifics of it, but it would have resulted in kind of like the absolute sort of boot on the throat of every indie developer ever. It would have completely killed off like any kind of grassroots bedroom development, because it would have meant that there was no predictability in income streams and things like that. And they were even
Exactly.
talking at one point.
Market logics destroying the ability for us to access good games.
Yeah,
Once again, again,
yeah,
it's not your, your woman in blue hair or your migrant or your trans player, that is ruining the games industry. It's
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
execs in these boardrooms that are creating absolutely mind-blowing decisions that are hindering what an amazing pastime it could be.
Yeah. But I think that I bring that example up because obviously, thousands of maybe millions of developers said, well, we're not going to use Unity anymore. This is not going to happen. We'll look elsewhere. We'll look to sort of like, sort of more freeware stuff. And they had to walk back that decision. And I think that there's still rumblings that they're going to do something shitty in the future. Of course they are. But, the CEO had to step down as a result of that. So,
No, the
we
beauty
know
again
that.
of games and why I also think it's such a potent space is because the gap between the consumer and the creator, and then the even the boards that are controlling the creator is so small. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know, you buy your packet of milk, it's much harder to see or understand who are the people, or like, I guess, but what are the production chains above that? And
Yeah,
with gaming, it's much closer, and so there is real space for affecting that change for sure.
definitely. Yeah. Um, And I think that kind of like that brings us really neatly to kind of a little coda. I don't want to kind of ruin anything more that's in the book because it's really really good, and I'd really encourage everybody who's on the stream and anybody who watches the video afterwards, like go and buy it. So Miriam's very kindly agreed that anybody who buys a copy of the book from Dead Ink in the next couple of days, we're going to get Miriam to sign some book plates. Before we send them out to you, we'll stick them in, and so you'll have your very own Miriam Did Everything to Play
And I
For. I
do
would really recommend
write
you do
little
that.
messages in them. It's not just a signature, just to say
She's gonna
that.
write little
Yeah.
messages in them, guys. Come on, like what can I tell you?
Sheets for
It's
my
like
favorite video games,
it's it's like your like little personalized Dark Soul or Elden Ring message. Like sort of like try this chest skeleton. Anyway, we got like 10 minutes before we gotta close up shop. And I've got a couple of questions that I just like to sort of silly ones. But I'm just going to go through the chat and just see if anybody has asked a question. Okay, we've got one here. I'm really interested in particularly rooting this in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Could you speak a little bit more about how we can root gaming in contemporary political contexts?
not being light on us, right? So I mean, I do there's an example that I talk about where a video game company has, or there is an NGO working in Israel and Palestine trying to bring
Mhm,
together gamers from both sides to kind of see
mhm,
each other as people as humans, which I think maybe is a kind of a big problem in the region. And so even that I will celebrate, because there's just such a lack of it. There's an amazing indie game by a Palestinian creator that I also talk about where they exude a violence towards the IDF in a very poetic way that I think shows again that just having violence in video games is not necessarily bad. That for some reasons you have to, that the display of it that is so raw and informative to the player is very much of necessity.
mhm.
And I would like to have a diversification of kind of violence in games in that way. I mean, again, that doesn't mean that it has to be one-sided. It can be, like, I guess I'm just thinking, like all that we're seeing is Americans essentially bombing everybody else. And I know some people are also attempting to, or are desiring to do, some Ukraine and Russia-based games, but. And I don't necessarily want to see like, okay, well, Russians have just made games where they kill Ukrainians, so Ukrainians have games where they kill Russians. So I think
Yeah,
there's also,
yeah.
again, I think that there are much more sophisticated ways to think of the mechanics there. Although, we all like to kill our own bad guy as well. So again, I will leave it to the game designers to think of what they are. Um, I think supporting Palestinian game makers is extremely important. I know that there are some people bringing some, putting some work together as we speak to create a much wider platform towards them, towards their work and when funding their work. You know, many people might not know, but there are, exactly indie game developers with Unity in West Bank at their desk, attempting to make games. And again, that is not something that we have seen. I mean, if we decide, as the great Stuart Hall has told us, that the popular culture and generally pop environment is a space of give and take and a space of a battle of political ideas, then what we've seen, I suppose, is that certainly in the last 40 years, the kind of American imperialism for all has completely has been the dominant force, and I think that precisely has dehumanized, particular populations, and in this way, resulting to where we are, like that unquestioning has allowed particular countries to build up arsenals that are unmanageable, yes, and again, it shouldn't have been this way. But
Yeah.
there was a particularity to that question in terms of how can game companies help, or what was the
I think it was really just about like how can we talk meaningfully, and how can we sort of like think about the medium of video games like in contemporary sort of like political conflicts, in contemporary political context, I should say. Just for everyone who can't see the chat, the game that Mariam's talking about that sort of like deals with Palestinian violence against the IDF is called Under Ash. And it starts out with you like sort of throwing rocks at a tank, and as you progress through the game, like you actually sort of start like sort of getting involved in insurgency activities and sort of like what that might look like, and the kind of like the implications of that. There's just a quote from the book here that I just really want to just kind of read because I think it's really spot on. Violence should not scare the progressive left. There is a lot of it in the world, and more of it will come our way before it feels like we're winning. Video games do not need to be sanitized of the discomforts of life to be radical or politically useful. One can be sure that the political right will employ the gaming space for any and all themes. Instead of blindly censoring violence, we must come up with egalitarian alternatives to censoring violence. And I think that's kind of exactly what you've been saying there.
This is why people write books. You see, I can't talk as beautifully as I
Oh boy. Okay, so that we've got to thank you.
But yeah, I
100%
worry also about gratuity. Like I would implore this person as well to think critically about. You will probably see a lot of projects and perhaps, again, also even political games on the theme and so on. And I would implore to think critically, who is selling them to you, whose mind are they attempting to change, for what reason, who are they highlighting, again, if it's, like, follow the money as well as so support projects that perhaps think about these questions a bit more than just slapping a theme on a particular product.
Yeah, I mean, and I will say there are lots of really good games that do that. I couldn't speak to the behind the scenes sort of activism that these companies are doing. But Route 96 is it Route or Road 96, where you sort of play as a you're in a car, you're trying to cross the border because you're trying to flee conflict somewhere, and kind of like repeats infinite amount of times, and that's another one that I think is really and it's set in America as well, so I think it kind of like it's putting, it's kind of like subverting that sort of trope that this stuff happens like in places where everything's yellow and sandy,
yeah, and also different mediums just get treated so differently, right? Like within a year of the Columbine massacre, there was a video game made and a film made, and the video game, the creator of it basically got canceled for making a gratuitous violence video game, and then the filmmaker was Lars von Trier, and he got Palme d'Or, so again, we were treating the treatment of the same theme under different mediums very, very differently in terms of how it's perceived by the society, which is very sad. Yeah,
we've got a couple more comments here. So Mera has just said we made one a political game, and it got blocked by platforms. It got attacked, and as makers we got accused. It's hard to make a political game, and I think absolutely
classic. and this is very much what I also underline, that again, a lot of political art gets fetishized and beloved and folded into the arts industry, whereas political games get banned, you know, like, and actually are not supported by the platforms. Years ago, I created a left up video on basically Steam announcing, you know, new rules about, you know, we're not going to be allowing, and it was a very dumb definition of like what kind of games they're not going to be allowing. One of them was like games that are trolling, you know, and stuff like that. And it's just, to me, like, if we are saying that, and I mean, to be fair, of course, there's itch.io and smaller platforms and so on, but like, if we are saying that the video games are like a strong cultural platform, we're now making, you know, Barbican and MoMA and VNA to have exhibitions about games, and we're saying that the 90%, well, I don't know, like, how much it is exactly, but the vast majority of games go through Steam, which has such, or like Apple Store, that who have like extremely narrow definition of what art can be and what creativity can be, and also they do just have an on and off switch entirely for these pieces of art, you know. So I mean, and I understand that, of course, during the times of greater, you know, unsafety online, like we need to have rules. Like I'm not against that, but we need to have some sort of sophistication of rules or diversification of where games can be, because right now, you know, on one hand we're saying it's culture, on the other hand, precisely like a game like yours, you know, like it cannot be on these great spaces of curatorship, you know.
No, you talk about kind of like the monopolies that certain digital distributors have, and how like kind of like they essentially are tastemakers. I'm thinking of the example here of the makers of Devotion. You know, this is a game that's sort of like they've made a previous game called Detention, which sort of deals with Taiwanese and Taiwanese Chinese occupancy. Devotion is this game that's famously been banned from all sorts of platforms because it was perceived that there may or may not have been a meme within the game, buried somewhere in the game, that compared Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. Obviously, you can't do that. He doesn't like that. And so all the game fronts just pulled it overnight. And this is a game that really is about sort of the dangers of like cult activity and the guilt that kind of comes from like sort of signing away your life to like an overbearing organization. It's quite ironic, isn't it, that then that game got pulled because an overbearing organization decided they didn't like it anymore. You know,
yeah, there are numerous examples like that, especially if they
all night about it. We really could. Unfortunately, we can't. We've got one more question, and I've got one of my own, and I'm going to stop. So, Michael of Bookshop fame has asked us a question for you both. What game have you got the most hours on, and how many hours is it? I know what the answer is to this. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, for me, it's probably Quake Champions, and it's around 300.
Okay. So I'm going to look what mine is now because I can find out in real time what it is.
Right.
So it's either going to be Elden Ring with 325. I'm not proud of it. In fact, actually, no. You know what? Dark Souls.
Oh, then you like more. That my last sentence is talk about Elden Ring. I think, yeah.
Yeah, they do. Or the other one, in fact, I think this one's going to be more. And this outs me as the hideous colonizer that I am. Oh no, it's the same. At 320 for Civilization 6 as well.
But you know, my humankind count is also quite high. And I'm also now playing Frostpunk 2, by the way, which is brilliant. And that's also going to count up into the hundreds as well. So it's a problem, but it's so fun. But yeah,
so my last
Quake
question...
Champions, Quake Arena, but that was before Steam even. Like I was like absolutely at it.
Yeah.
My
I'm
FPS.
pretty sure that like if we went back and like look before games had like a Steam hour count, I'm pretty sure there were others. So let's just move on from that, I think. My last question was: do you have any recommendations for our listeners, for our readers, about games that are either explicitly or implicitly kind of like literary? So games that maybe deal with books or book production, or games that like involve like a lot of kind of like literary tropes, or maybe games that involve a certain famous author who looks a little bit like Stephen King. I don't know. I've got a couple on the list, but I'd like to know if you've got any.
Oh gosh, I wish you would have prepped me for this one a little bit. Honestly, when you talk about games and literature, the Chinese Rooms games always come to mind, just because I know that the incredible Dan Pinchbeck, well, sadly not with the studio anymore, but he is, you know, he has made always a point of his references are rarely other games, you know, like his references are definitely movies, but always books, and his writing. I think his writing is always, and there will be some absolutely most obscure books about, you know, the explorers in 19th century Antarctica, you know,
Yeah.
or the story of yeah, some one life story of a very depressed Russian cosmonaut or so on, you know, like, or of course 1970s Scottish poetry, of course, you know, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I think the future of gaming, hopefully the best of it, will be by makers who reference, you know, other parts of literature rather than just other games. And I think what you're describing, if anything, is it just underlines a certain poverty of intersection between both worlds. I don't, you know, I don't think it will be a massive insult to say to the to the games industry that you know, it doesn't read as much as it should, not as much,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
certainly not as many books. I mean, they will just about watch some films, you know, but often even that is not good enough. The amount of times, you know, I've had people tell me, you know, oh, it's really a book, can it be an audio book, please? You know, I don't have the attention span, you know, to read a book, which is, you know, devastating to hear as an author, but also I think is a sign of a certain level of illiteracy
Hmm.
within a field. Oh my God, I'm thinking about, you know, some good adaptations, but even those are not very good, you
Yeah.
know, like even
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So
even the Sherlock Holmeses of the world, like Conan Doyle, you know, to my pride, I was reading already at 3 years old, and like I was reading Conan Doyle at 5, you know, so to me that's like, again, this is so important so I don't even think of Sherlock Holmes like, you know, from the movies or whatnot. For me, it was the very much the books first and foremost, and to see them bastardized in games really, really badly is obviously terribly upsetting.
I got a couple, so I'm just gonna throw them out there. So
Who
these aren't
prepared for
necessarily
this?
games
You
that are kind of.
see,
So I know this is so unfair. This is the master of puppets behind the scenes. So the big one for me is Pentiment. I mean, if you want a game about books, like Pentiment is literally a book. Well, it's
just
sorry, it's not. It's a
so
illuminated
I would have
manuscript.
never. I guess it makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
So
scriptures,
if you
and
know,
also George Sawyer does an amazing thing where he lists all of his bibliography, you know, at the end of the game as well.
yeah,
So yeah, makes sense. Perfect. Yeah.
Pentiment is amazing. This game about a 16th century Bavarian manuscript illustrator at the time when illuminated manuscripts are going out and the printing press is coming in, and the dying off of scriptoriums in like provincial monasteries and murder mysteries. And if it sounds like that sounds crazy and mad, it is, and it's awesome, and it's so good.
And
It's
it's a
so good.
detective
Um,
story. The art is exquisite. And Josh, oh my God, he is definitely one of those who reads. I haven't been at his yet, but like he constantly, you know, sends me files of the books that he's reading.
yeah,
A lot of it is German history and so on. So
yeah.
definitely that guy is radical, brilliant, and creative, and reads the hell out of everything. So yeah.
Also, on the opposite end, less kind of highbrow, we've got Alan Wake 1 and 2. I mean, these are games about an author, and is the book writing him, or is he writing the
I
book?
guess so.
Uh,
Yeah, I guess I
yeah,
would. I mean, of course, the Disco Elysiums of the world, just because of the beauty of the language, you know, those are words that you can tell, you know. And Kurvitz also talks about it very, very beautifully about how, you know, every word needs to be spoken a few times before it even ends up in the game, you know. So and
yeah,
that is
yeah,
also an individual who can, you know, who can quote his Bulgakov and his Proust like nobody's business, you know. So
yeah.
I just have
But
to give a shout out to that lot.
again, for anyone in the chat, this is Disco Elysium. This is a game that thrusts you into a kind of an alternate near future universe where communism has happened and it's kind of failed, and the sort of the fallout of that. And there's fascists on the street, and there's a little guy called Kuno with a Liverpool accent, which is it's very exciting. It's I don't know. Gosh, is it the most well-written game ever made? Who could say? I wouldn't necessarily want to say that, but maybe.
And their
Very
claim to
cool.
fame, and so another way was one of their creators went to the Game Awards, accepted the best game award, and sent like, I thank Marx and Engels for giving me the
Yeah,
political education, you know, which is like, you know, can't, yeah, if only Lucas Pope did that, you
you
see.
can't talk it, right? I mean, we didn't really get a chance to talk about Disco Elysium and the developers in any depth, but like these are people who are like wearing their hearts on the sleeves. Also, the creators of Dead Cells, I think they said that they're anarcho-syndicalists, I believe. So that's kind of cool as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not necessarily literary, but very kind of like politically engaged. Do you know what? I've already taken us 35 minutes over, so I'm going to get shouted at. Marijam, it's been such a pleasure. I've had so much
Such
fun
a
tonight.
pleasure. Bam, 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 bam. And thank you so much for such a beautiful like run through the book. Yeah, it feels so special to be talking to such an engaged reader. And thank you. We need more people like you in we need more people like you in games and also literature needs more people like you talking about games as well. You know, so both. So thank you.
So just before we go, order the book from the website. We'll engage in a little bit of sort of free market exchange of resources, and then you can have the book, and yeah, that'll be
Yes.
good. Mariam's going to sign them over the next few days. That's going to be cool. Is there anywhere where our listeners can kind of like get more of your stuff? Like, is there anything that you'd want to plug, like sort of like blogs or podcasts or anything like that?
No,
Or
totally. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I am kind of a working class Eastern European that built my name solely through Twitter. So certainly, please, while that is there, sadly, I will ask you to join me there. On Insta, I'm kind of not as, I'm not as, that's not true. I'm increasingly active, attempting to also move some units here. So please follow me here too. On my website, marijamdid.com, there are all the events that I'm doing on the book, of which there are many in many different cities. So please check that out. Everything to play for, how video games are changing the world, out now with Verso Books. Thank you.
sounds good. See you guys at the next event, hopefully. Thank you so much, Mariam. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
And